Okay, so hi everyone. I will briefly introduce the panelists. First, on my left, there is Abdul Osman, which is the CEO of Goracle, and he has a background in both business administration and computer science, and is also interested in philosophy. We had a big talk about philosophy, and he has been part of teams and have developed banking software used by millions of Canadians daily, and he believes that secure and fast oracles are the key to realizing the potential of blockchain application. And I too believe that. And on the left, there is Andreas Dittrich. Is that correct? Yeah. Dr. Andreas is a computer scientist with a professional track record of 25 years in the IT industry since 2019. And Andreas led the transformation of Deutsche Telekom enterprise blockchain business to focus on supporting and promoting public blockchain. And Andreas is currently managing director of Finoa, a consensus service, and he also speaks Italian. I discovered this, which is pretty good. And on his left, there is Nicholas Fett, which I'm sure you heard his talk about Tellor. And Nicholas Fett is the CTO of Tellor, of course, and he formerly as an economist and CTF and EF grantee and CEO of Daxia. He specialized in applying game theory and economics to build and launch products that are truly decentralized and work to add value to communities. Okay, and last but not least, we have Saša Milić, that you had the chance to hear all her constructive questions. Saša is an independent researcher in the crypto blockchain space. She's one of the co-authors of the AP3 white papers and previously worked as a data scientist for Gauntlet Network, and she has an academic background in computer science and statistics. Okay, so the topic that we will discuss in this panel concern moving real-world industries on-chain, okay? So to introduce this panel, I remember a speech by Andreas Antonopoulos that was called The Killer App, Bananas on the Blockchain. Basically what he said was that we may not decentralize every application, and we cannot decentralize everything with blockchain. So I would like to know from you if you share this vision, if you have a different vision, if you have a different opinion, and also which industries you think that can be decentralized and that can be decentralized with blockchain and a robust Oracle solution. Who would like to start?
Hello, I can start. So was the question, can everything be decentralized? That essentially?
Well, can every industry be, so it is desirable to decentralize every industries, and can we decentralize everything with blockchain? Yeah.
Oh, okay. So actually, I think it was Thomas from P Network in the last talk actually said something very similar to what I was going to say, but I agree with him that I think like Bitcoin and maybe Ethereum too is like the most decentralized we'll ever be. Like layer ones is pretty much as decentralized as we're going to be. And as soon as you start adding complexity with additional applications and whatnot, you get into like multi-sig wallets and oracles and all these technologies that have points of centralization. Like even a decentralized Oracle network has to communicate with a data source that's centralized in some way. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we can fully decentralize everything, and I hope that we can move in a direction where we're just honest about this instead of everyone like LARPing and pretending like they're fully decentralized, to just be honest about what elements of centralization their solution has, and then the users can be then the users can make the decision like, yes, I trust this, or I'm okay with this point of centralization. So no, I don't think all industries can be fully decentralized, and I think it's important to be honest about what is decentralized and what isn't.
Okay.
Yeah, I think I can sort of add to that too. Like, I sort of don't agree with the premise of the question that it is even desirable to have everything decentralized. You know, you look at everything being decentralized. Decentralization has costs as well, so it is, you know, even just paying for gas or doing certain things in a decentralized manner. Having just a centralized point that we can sort of trust, and having, say, a central government, like, unless you're like a full-on anarchist or something like that, like, there are benefits to having a central party. And so we might not want to decentralize everything. What things do I think that we will have in a decentralized manner, I think are things that we actually want to be censorship resistant. And they can sort of be even these checks on centralized systems. So, you know, like Bitcoin originally was sort of looking to be this decentralized money. And even just having an option as a decentralized money makes centralized monies better, because now people have an option. And I think in a lot of ways, you know, having this alternate financial system or having the ability to do things in a decentralized manner will just sort of make the centralized systems in a lot of way better and be a check, so.
Okay. Well, maybe since we're going the row here, so that don't have much to add, to be honest, because I think you pretty much nailed my opinion there as well. I personally really believe in the power of decentralization, but it's important to think about what's the need and then see what's the best solution. And that's not always necessarily decentralized. And there are good reasons to centralize stuff. Yeah. So I think probably the question is, are we decentralized enough, is only a good question in a very specific context. I wouldn't even nail it to specific industries, but probably more context specific you are, more centralization can be useful. Think about first-party oracles, for example. Why is it called first-party oracle? I mean, probably you have better solutions for that with API 3, but it's very hard to decentralize that if you want to have the specific opinion or the specific data point of an individual party. If you go below then, look at networks like Ethereum that are basically use case agnostic virtual machines. You want to have as much decentralization as possible. And I didn't hear Toby's talk, unfortunately, but I tend to disagree then and say, maybe it might be the maximum of decentralization that we have seen. That's pretty much possible in the end, but we definitely need more because we still depend on individuals as much as respect as I have for guys like Vitalik, for example. But what happens to Ethereum if something happens to Vitalik? So you see there are still points of centralization with the importance of his opinion, not talking about the token weight of the Ethereum whales, that we still need to fight to make Ethereum, let's say, a truly decentralized or as much decentralized as necessary platform for any use case on top. So again, not a specific industry, but less generic you get, more decentralization you need. I'd say a more use case specific you are, you will have the need for centralization as well. And it's about finding the best compromise. I don't think there's a definite answer for that.
Okay.
Yeah, so just going back to why blockchain was even created is to kind of give power back to the people in a sense, right? So there are certain things which may not be desirable, such as healthcare. That one-on-one care is still really important and personal. But healthcare in a lot of parts of the world isn't what it should be because of corruption. So if we could use blockchain, for example, if I can pay my taxes in a way that's transparent, which can reduce corruption, or we can use decentralization to solve a lot of the most pressing problems, I think it'll have a cascading effect where you reduce corruption, you automatically improve healthcare, and you don't need to decentralize healthcare because you've taken care of corruption.
Okay. And so you decided not to talk about a specific sector, but if you have to choose one, and you say, this sector needs to be decentralized, in my opinion, which one will you choose? Yeah.
Wow. It's maybe infrastructure.
Infrastructure.
Or anything that base services.
Okay.
But when you think about base financial services, do they really need to be fully decentralized? I mean, I'm from Finoa, so we are a centralized custody provider.
Okay.
People come to us because of problems with decentralization.
Okay. That's a good point.
because of liability. We are liable as a party, right? And by the way, self-custody is hard. And look into this room, I don't want to know who did not lose money because they messed up their interaction with their wallet, right? Or chose the wrong DeFi protocol to interact with. So self-custody is hard and makes a ton of sense to offsource that to other parties. The question is whether those need to be centralized or not. But I think there's a strong case for centralization as well as the same as for decentralization. So again, where do you want to have decentralization? More basic you get, more decentralization you need, because those are the building blocks for whatever is on top. And you want to diversify that landscape and decentralize especially power, decentralize resources and power there.
Okay.
I want the financial industry to be decentralized.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's where do we want censorship resistance actually to happen? So, you know, like having the ability to move money and nobody able to stop you, that's really important. Even if ultimately like Granny and her 401k isn't in blockchain, like having that base layer to like, if I need to, nobody can censor me. And, you know, other things I think are going to, like free speech platforms are going to be big, whether it's, you know, things like WikiLeaks or journalism. People are starting to put on, like, those have really big use cases for actually being decentralized. File storage, you know, like I think we'll want some option. Like, yeah, we're not going to store every video ever in a decentralized manner. That would probably be wasteful, but, you know, having the option to do so is going to be really powerful. So.
Definitely.
I'll just quickly add that that's a good point, because we sometimes forget why things should be decentralized or what the whole purpose is, and it is censorship resistance and fault tolerance and stuff like that.
Definitely. Okay. So often we talk about trust when we talk about oracles, and so going into a more philosophical mood. I remember, a definition of trust that I like is one from Myers-Schurman, and it says that basically trust is the willingness to be vulnerable upon the expectation, upon a positive expectation of the other party. So, if we have to think about how Oracle can create trust into a real-world use case, or they can reproduce trust, or defend trust into a real-world scenario. So how can Oracle do that? So how can Oracle build trust into a real-world scenario?
Yeah, okay, great question. I'll start with answering that one.
More than technical.
Well, the way you define trust, being vulnerable, very dramatic way to define trust. Most dictionaries define trust as the belief that someone or something will fulfill an expected behavior, right? And if you look at the frameworks of trust, you know, you have peer-to-peer. I trust you directly, and I transact with you. Another framework is I transact with you, but I trust eBay. And then another framework is I'll pay my taxes, so I trust the government that I pay my taxes, so like a Leviathan. And I trust that they will provide me with social services. I can send my kids to school, or I can access healthcare more than my money would. And those are the three traditional ones. Blockchain has introduced a new kind of trust into the equation, which is distributed trust. And a lot of people use the word trustless, which is, in my opinion, is a misnomer. What it really means is distributed trust. And I'm trusting thousands of people that my transaction with you will go through. And so if trust is 100%, I'm trusting everybody like 0.001%. And it's really hard for my trust to be compromised because it's so distributed. You know, for oracles, if you want to achieve trustless oracles, I think you have to kind of match that level where the more you can rely on different sources to get the same information. And ultimately, you know, if you want to establish trust, it's about reducing information asymmetry. The more knowledge everybody in both parties have, the easier they can transact, and the more trust that will create. So, you know, to increase knowledge, you really have to have multiple or diversity of data sources. So can you have a situation where you have to trust an Oracle? I think it's impossible because an Oracle knows the history of transactions, so it knows all the balances of everybody, but it can never know what the temperature is right now, right? So because of that, you have to have distributed trust, in my opinion, to match the blockchain.
Yeah, well, it's sort of distributed. I mean, there's like a difference between like distributed trust and reputations versus like the way that most blockchains would define trust. Like, like I trust Ethereum because like if you assume that the actors are sort of financially interested for themselves, like it's safe, if I send you $10, it's not like it's distributed trust, it's like safe up to $10. If you're going to send like $10 billion, it's probably not safe. Like there's just sort of a cap there on the financial, the max that you can send, and it's just it's sort of crypto-economic trust in a way is how I like to think of it. And there's like a big difference in whenever you're looking at like Oracle designs as far as like, are we just splitting trust, because there's a big difference in like trusting the Ethereum layer versus trusting a multi-sig, and whatever of 5 of 21 multi-sig. Like there's a huge difference, like even if it is distributed, and making sure that we just sort of cut through that. And it's like, it's not about just distributing trust. It's about making systems that are sort of actually decentralized and measurably sort of trustless, if you will.
I want to kind of clarify the question because I think I heard it differently. Are you asking like how companies in like traditional industries can become more trustworthy using oracles?
Well,
did I mishear the question?
Well, definitely also
okay, well,
we can think about this.
Oh, sure. That's the question I heard. But just a really simple, practical example is just like there's a record of the data that you provide when it's on the blockchain. So you can't really like there's a record and history of the information you provide. So if you ever lied at some point, it's not something you can go back and change. Yeah.
Okay. So you want to
just
add
adding,
something?
by the way, if you want to be philosophical here, oracles, it's hard to not be philosophical when talking about oracles.
Definitely.
Because by definition, you're crossing domains with oracles. So your scope of trust, look at DeFi. Who in this room thinks oracles used in DeFi are actually decentralized? I know Chainlink's doing a terrific job to achieve that, but it's not really the case, right? Most of this is aggregated data in a decentralized way of centralized oracles. So but we trust it because it's within the scope of DeFi, which we think is decentralized. The oracle is from a different domain, and it might not be decentralized at all there. So I think the question of trust in oracles is you really need to look, again, as I said before, at the specific use case, because it's, you quickly lose scope of the origin of an oracle and where it's actually used. And probably you're having multiple trust boundaries in between. No?
Okay. I just wanted to ask Nicholas, since he said that depending on the amount of the transaction, he would trust or not a precise ecosystem. Okay. So I would like to know, so what should change between an ecosystem and another for you to trust, for example, a platform also for higher amount of
I mean, usually it's time for like an L1. So, like if you send money to Coinbase, you got to wait 6 block confirmations on Bitcoin before they allow it. And if you send even more money, you'll have to wait more confirmations. Just because if it's more money, then it's worth it for you to sort of reorg the whole blockchain.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why. That's where it comes from.
Okay.
And I think risk management will stay with us whether we live in a decentralized world or not, right? Even the most decentralized network, you have certain parameters that might make it, just to keep the example, a transaction too risky for you. So you do it another way. Yeah? So you still have to manage your risk independent of decentralization.
Definitely.
And I just want to add, like, sending money from one account to another on a blockchain, I think is one thing. I think the question is, trusting an external piece of data coming onto the blockchain. And I think that's kind of where it's all about the knowledge, right? You know, Chainlink is not one oracle. They are branded as a network of oracle. And each oracle, we know who their oracles are, like you said. And people know enough about Chainlink and they know the network. And most oracles out there have significant documentation where you can learn about how they're using it. And so, you know, trust, you have to give up something. You have to be giving up something. Like you said, you have to be making yourself vulnerable.
Yeah.
And, you know, so that's, in my opinion, that's kind of where that comes in. You have to know enough to be able to be vulnerable. And that's where knowledge is really the key.
No, but I mean, like, Chainlink's the perfect example as far as, like they're a decentralized network of oracles, but sort of in practice, like, people using it, they're one oracle. You know what I mean? Most people are just reading their price feed contracts, and it's controlled by a multi-sig. So, it's a network of oracles, but if you break it actually down, it's a lot simpler. So.
I have a hot take on that. I think, because I read Chainlink 1.0 and Chainlink 2.0, and I think the whole like network of networks is a way of getting around the fact that like most of the all the data feeds are pretty much like 20 to 30 nodes that are like essentially Chainlink employees. So they're like, oh, this is actually one network in our network of networks, to make it sound like more decentralized.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And I mean, maybe for the crowd who don't know too much about, like, are you saying, so to give a more concrete example, let's say I wanted to know the temperature outside of Hotel Berlin, right? Mm-hmm. I could take a thermometer and I could go out there and I know that that's the temperature. But if I told you, like, I'll give you 10,000 if you're right, and I'll take away 10,000 from you if you're wrong, you know, you might buy 20 thermometers, right? But what if you're not in town? You might have the employees here all reading off the same thermometer, and that's kind of really what Chainlink does, have a bunch of staff here that all read from one thermometer. You might want different Berliners to come here with their own thermometers and get you that. So really that's kind of, you know, what you would probably want in a, you know.
Definitely. Okay. Then I will like also to ask, what do you think about having a real-world application supervised by a third party, which can be a strong institution, a government, you know, a certification authority? Do you think that is desirable to have a third-party institution to monitor blockchain application? And if so, what should they supervise? What should they audit?
I don't think that sounds like a good idea.
I agree.
The question is what you mean with supervision, right? Again,
well, it depends on what you mean about for institution. If they are malevolent institution, I don't know. Or just, for example, I just make an example, a real example. I was asked to supervise a traceability project and about a dairy product, okay, the supply chain of dairy product. And we found that since there were some products that were supervised by a certification authority that you know, check the data and you know, they have an history of data. So we thought that maybe if this supervising authority that knows a lot about this product also supervised the blockchain traceability process, maybe the whole application could be more trusted if there is a third party that, well, it's not the government, it's not, you know, they don't get anything out of it. This is their job.
Maybe I don't understand the question, but wouldn't that sort of be like the Ethereum Foundation? That is like something that monitors Ethereum and invests in research and stuff like that? Maybe I'm misunderstanding the question.
Yeah.
Maybe allow me to pick it up, because if you talk about supervision, that's a very sensitive topic.
Okay.
Is it like regulation?
It's not like regulation.
It's not like regulation.
No.
Okay. Yeah. But on the other hand, we do have parties supervising code, for example.
Okay.
I mean, you have, and for good reason, you have penetration tests, you have smart contract audits and stuff like that. And for the outsider that doesn't have enough of time or expertise, simply the badge of having like high-profile security auditors approving that piece of code, that gives trust. And I think that's there are faults, of course, in the system as well. It's not perfect, but it's definitely helping the ecosystem grow and helping to grow trust in the ecosystems that we're talking about. But that's not supervision, right?
Yeah, what if it's specifically about data, the data flow? If they supervise just the data flow?
Maybe allow me to finish on what I said before. If you're crossing boundaries, blockchain and all its decentralized goodies live fully in the digital domain. So what you're talking about, I don't know, guaranteeing some property of a dairy product, that's a physical product. Mm-hmm. And you have individuals interacting with it on the way from the cow to your plate, right? So it's simply not possible to have this fully decentralized. Okay. And now where do you get trust on the way from the cow to your plate? And I'm pretty sure that, but that's then a regulation thing, because usually regulation requires certificates. Okay. But even without regulation, trusted parties that guarantee a certain property of the product may be secured by a certification is definitely useful. That's not to say that everything should be certified and regulated, because that'll hinder all the innovation that we need. But they're definitely useful applications for sure.
Yeah, and I think what you're actually going to start seeing are more public funded Oracle feeds on top of networks. You know, like similar to how like my first job out of college, I worked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics in the US. So we published like inflation and unemployment numbers, and those are just government funded surveys because, you know, it's sort of a public good. And I think you'll start seeing things like that, whether it is, you know, the US whether it is like a Bureau of Labor Statistics publishing data, or like an Ethereum foundation saying like, hey, we're just going to put a random number feed up on chain, or, you know, like the price of Ethereum. And I think you'll have more of those trusted feeds, if you will, that are sort of like monitored and stuff from these institutions once they realize, oh, there's some general good. But there's sort of a difference between, say, like those versus, you know, a generic Oracle that you can query and ask questions to.
Yeah, it really depends based on the use case, right? Like for something like, you know, the cow to the plate, the incentive to cheat is so high, and the information asymmetry is also so high, when no one knows what's happening at the barn. You know, with something like the Department of Labor Statistics, this is something other people can verify for themselves, but because you have a trusted authority kind of doing the work, and it's expensive work, you can kind of trust almost that these kind of government institutions that most people trust will do the right job. So really, it depends. And those, I think, are two extremes.
Yeah, and I think we actually sort of got in the way of, you know, of some of, in the past, like Coinbase, if you remember, they used to like sign their API messages and for anybody to put on chain, and then they sort of stopped for a while, and a lot of exchanges were getting on board, like, oh, we'll just sign all of our transactions that you can put them on chain. And then it was like US regulations that kind of got in the way of that, because like if they're used for derivatives products, then you could be liable for having the exchange that underlies these illegal derivatives products. And you know, there were other regulatory issues as well. So a lot of exchanges have since not done that. So like we could like get some regulations out of the way and just have people sort of be more open to signing data like API feeds to put on chain. And I think some of that will open up the space for oracles and make, you know, because like if you just want a median of 5 exchanges, it would be really nice if those exchanges were really trustworthy to just sign their data and put it on chain. But unfortunately, they don't do that. So you have to like come up with other ways to get the data.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so if we talk about a specific sector, I don't know if you are able, if you want to speak about a specific sector. No.
Oh, I will.
without joke. Now, if we want to talk about a specific sector, for example, about traceability of product, because there are a lot of workshops, a lot of places where they talk about blockchain traceability, spotting fake product with blockchain. So, how do you think blockchain and oracles can be, successfully utilized to do this job? And how can those systems be resistant to manipulation? Because I see a lot of vulnerabilities in those kind of application. Well, they're not everyone vulnerable, but a lot of applications outside are not robust.
I don't know if anyone goes first, because that's usually the point where I start to ramble about that topic.
Totally open.
But maybe let me start, and happy if anyone disagrees. So first of all, I think the concept of intellectual property in itself is pretty much toxic for our society, and the way copyright and patents and brand rights and so on are being used currently is pretty much in the opposite of what they were intended for. They were intended to guarantee innovation, or to guarantee the most innovative players a slight advantage to the market, to basically facilitate innovation. What they're currently used for is exactly the opposite. And counterfeit products are kind of the same thing. Is it really in our interest to have perfect counterfeit protection? I'm not sure. But to your question, I don't think it's possible at all.
Okay.
At least blockchain, oracles, whatever you want to have, they can be some part of the solution, but only within the digital domain.
Okay.
Now we're talking about physical objects. And I am among those people who have tried quite a few proof of concept concepts to guarantee product provenance or counterfeit protection using blockchain. And it turns out you can solve everything very nicely once you're in a digital domain, but 95% is outside of that. And that's already the manufacturing process, is completely out of the control of the digital grip of a blockchain. And this is where you deal with players that don't play nice, with documentation that's wrong on purpose. You're dealing with, for example, this watch, I could give it to you and the blockchain certificate. It could be an NFT or anything, could be unearthed and show it as perfect, while at the same time some expert already tinkered with it, and you simply cannot distinguish it from the original. So most of the problems you're having in such an example are outside the digital domain, and by definition cannot be handled by blockchain. That's one of the reasons why we don't see this awesome, great supply chain use case, product provenance use case, or anything that's related to blockchain solving problems in the physical world.
Yeah.
I have another hot take. It's not mine, but I heard it from like a big crypto guy. Sorry, I don't want to name drop. I don't want to name drop or anything like that. But he told me that he thinks that the digital, I don't know if I buy this or not, but he thinks digital reality will become more real than real reality. So if you have an NFT that says you have a real Rolex, people are gonna, even if the Rolex is fake, if the NFT says it's real.
That's a nice point. Yeah. That's actually a good point.
That's gonna be more important than the physical object even being the real thing.
And by the way, blockchain can perfectly work against counterfeit loot, for example. If you have digital loot as NFTs, it works nicely, I think. Yeah.
That's a good point, because when you buy a $100,000 Rolex, you're not really buying it to tell the time, right? You're just showing that you have a really expensive watch.
Time is money.
Yeah, but you can get a good result with a $200 watch. So.
Okay. Well, since I've read a lot of also academic article about this traceability thing, and basically I came up to a similar conclusion to yours, because at a certain point, the problem was always the same. How do you attach a physical product to the blockchain? And normally this is a question that is avoided at the end. So, okay, I will just ask that. If you want to hypothesize a method, the strongest, well, the most robust that you can imagine about to attach a product to the blockchain, what would you do?
Well, yeah,
Anyone.
I think
Anyone.
Usually like the things that blockchains work really well for are what are like bearer assets. So whoever holds the key owns the asset. Like simple as that. Like the problem with all of the physical goods and the real world goods is always like, well, if the government comes with a gun and takes it from me, there's absolutely nothing you can do, even if you have the key to the NFT, to get that back. The only argument I've sort of heard, like I've heard it in conjunction with like the property on the blockchain. Like, why should we put property on the blockchain? Well, like in third world countries, you could put it all on chain, and then even if the government steals it from you, maybe you could argue with like the UN or some force with bigger guns, and here's a record that they couldn't delete. And like that's like the best argument I have for maybe putting it on the blockchain is like maybe it's like a historical proof that you can't delete, that maybe you can have some bigger person with guns give it back to you.
And I would also say once you have data in a decentralized, let's call it decentralized database with permissionless access, whatever, then it just opens up all the opportunities you want. I never said don't use blockchain. I just said watch out, there are problems you can't solve in the digital domain. And by the way, we are pretty good already in solving problems in the physical domain. We have a few thousand years of experience there, and it kind of works. It has its shortcomings, but it kind of works. And it works. I mean, we build trust different than in the digital domain, of course, but it kind of works. So once you can have a trustworthy system in the physical world, you cross that domain, you can do whatever you want with the data, and then it's important that you democratize access to that data. And I think a pretty nice example is, we had the temperature example. Look at the glaciers that are shrinking everywhere. It's pretty hard to deploy sensor networks to monitor those glaciers. So you have to rely on individual parties to do that. But this data is actually by academia is being provided to everyone in the world in a permissionless manner. So you can use that data and build your own model for how that glacier is shrinking, for example. That's the power that we can have. NASA at the moment is collecting all sorts of data in space. It's really hard to collect data in space. Not everyone can do that. At the moment, they're providing it, they're providing a lot of data, in fact, but they're providing it in a centralized manner. So they can still pull the plug. So obviously there's some optimization potential there. But again, that data is already digital. So you just have to do the next step. And this opens up, it's up to all of us, right, to create like the next application based on those types of data.
Definitely. So, are there questions from the audience for our panelists on those topics? Yes, please.
Yeah, thanks for that. Very interesting. Actually, I have a lot of questions, but I try to sort them. So you just mentioned that, okay, in like some places we have the problem when, okay, we might have a record on the blockchain and then government comes and steals anyway, and okay, you need somebody with bigger guns. But I think actually the problem usually starts before that, like bringing the data onto the blockchain, so exactly what an Oracle might do actually. So how do you get sort of the first ground truth, say, okay, you want to bring your land registry onto the blockchain, so how do you get to that first agreement? Like, what is the state right now? Because that's actually the bigger problem in many places, like there's not really agreement on who owns which lands, particularly like in like former colonized countries. And then once you have that agreement, then I would say that, okay, then actually that would, that would actually probably make things better, because even if the government could theoretically steal, if there's a record, then they might actually be less likely to do so. But this first problem is sort of maybe more relevant to get this process started at all. And then that leads me to the question of what kind of dispute mechanisms are imaginable. I mean, earlier we heard a talk about basically optimistic oracles and a dispute mechanism, but it has some sort of period until there's finality, and then that's done. But maybe, I mean, for something like land issues, I guess you would probably need a much longer period, maybe even years or something. I don't know. Can you imagine like a more generalized Oracle architecture that allows for that kind of stuff, or what could the resolutions look like?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I can go since you referenced mine, but you know, like, I'm not going to pretend like we can solve real problems up here. So, you know, like land registry is crazy hard and all of this stuff. So, you know, like the way that I would imagine it's sort of working, it's like ultimately who gets to define what is actually true. And in some cases, like if it's a personal dispute between neighbors over land, like, yeah, I mean, there's no oracle that's going to ever be able to figure that out. So you just have to ultimately have some government that puts the stamp on it, and this is the record that we go with. And in the same way that kind of dealing with oracle data, the easiest thing now are things that are sort of everybody can visualize and everybody can put on chain. So, you know, like the best example, the best oracle data out there right now that we can put on top of Ethereum, for instance, is like, let's put the Bitcoin block header. We can all agree on what that is, you know, at a given time. Another thing like prices, like generally we have a good idea about what prices are, so we can throw those on chain. But once it starts getting really subjective with, you know, he was talking about like the asymmetric information, like if only 5 people know about this specific event, it's really hard to dispute that specific event, and you might have to wait a long time. So, yeah, tough problems.
Yeah, definitely. Are there other questions for our panelists? I see some.
I'm running.
arms.
So there's been a lot of chat about not trusting governments, and the whole issue of trust is always framed at these sorts of conferences about consumers trusting or users trusting the system. But I mean, I live in Germany, I'm an immigrant to Germany, and the government seems here to only trust things that are written on paper. And I wonder if there's a sort of opportunity to actually persuade governments that things written on blockchains are as trustworthy or perhaps more so than paper records, and whether that's a potential route to, I guess, bringing more stuff on chain.
What's the question in very short is how do we make Germans believe in digital records instead of written ones?
I think the question is, should we be putting more resources into encouraging governments to trust on-chain systems, or treat on-chain systems as equivalent to?
I mean, I don't even think it needs to be on-chain. Yeah, I mean, just like, you know, getting them to move to the cloud is like 90% of the battle. So it's like, yeah, you know, like on-chain, like they want ability to change it. They don't want it to be immutable. Eventually, hopefully, you know, you can convince them to make it immutable, but, you know, right now they like it.
I feel like they trust cloud and Web 2 providers less than something that is decentralized and open.
I don't think they do.
So, I mean, this goes back to the different trust models I was talking about. You have peer-to-peer, right? 200 years ago, peer-to-peer was the best, which I trust you because I know everything about you. The government right now, like what you're saying is, how do you move them from a Leviathan where they trust the official records because that's the authority, to a distributed trust? Maybe until they see it as distributed, they don't believe. Right now, they probably still see it as being peer-to-peer. And as long as they see it as a peer-to-peer, and you know, it might not. Maybe if they start becoming data sources and they start putting the data themselves, that might help. But I think distributed trust is so new, it's going to take a little while to get used to. And eventually, once people get used to it, I think it'll really explode the number of applications that can be built on chain, and even the decentralization of data as well.
Definitely.
The first answer is yes. Right, of course we need to do more to make especially bureaucratic systems trust in digital sources. But it's also clear that this, I mean, especially if you're talking about peer-to-peer trust, stochastic trust and so on. There's no absolute trust, and that doesn't exist in the analog domain either. But the hierarchical systems that we have in bureaucratic systems and the rules attached that give us the illusion that somehow this piece of paper is perfect because it adheres to the rules. So there's a lot of education to be done. I mean, before we get started with decentralized trust, again, I mean, they don't even trust the cloud. Sometimes they don't even trust, I don't know, an email with a scan of a PDF in it. Why? Because it's mostly about, again, we're talking about risk management, right? The risk of not doing it according to the book to them is higher than the risk of accepting an email that's, I mean, that's most probably correct. So there's a lot of education to be done, and to be honest, I mean, we might have, I mean, in Germany, we're kind of okay when it comes to crypto regulation in terms of like, we are already doing something there. It's not perfect, but something's happening. But in terms of digitization of the society, it's a long way to go, man. And it's pretty depressing, the state we are in at the moment. The gap is widening too. Yeah. Everything you can do to convince our government and bureaucrats and so on to be more forward-thinking, please go ahead. Yeah. Very much appreciated.
Some countries like Estonia are doing great. They've moved voting all online, and they're leading the world. So, you know, maybe they might be the pioneers, the early adopters.
Are there other questions? I see.
Thanks. If you're talking about moving real-world industries on-chain, it seems that currently there's a substantial gap on infrastructure regarding scaling of data and compute. So the question would be, what is your personal estimate about how long it will roughly take where we actually would have that scale on data or storage and compute that is actually necessary to do that?
Allow me to answer just quickly. For the financial industry, this has already been disrupted, right? We are speaking, I don't think it's a resource problem. That's already happening since a few years. And the traditional financial sector is well aware of this. So for that sector alone, I think we don't need, it's not a problem. No.
Yeah, that's basically what I was going to say. Like when you, again, this is my opinion, I guess, but like when you hear people complain about like Ethereum not scaling or transactions not being fast enough, these are usually people that are trading like thousands of shitcoins a day. Like it's not like you sending money to your grandma or like putting some like doctor record on chain.
Well, you
like,
can send shitcoins to your grandma.
Well, maybe can I get a bit more specific? Just assume that there's a company called Planet that makes pictures on 5-meter resolution of this planet every day. And basically they're the data company. And it would be really cool to have that data in a trusted way on-chain and then extract information out of that. But this is really probably a different type of scale than just moving shitcoins around.
You also don't need a blockchain for that. Like if you just want like to store something permanently.
Yeah. So the question, I'm not saying that it needs to be on chain. Of course not. At the same time, you need some trusted infrastructure where you can actually rely that this data is coming from that source and it's not going to change. Whatever mechanisms you use are fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's ways to do it, but you know, like right now, it's just like the only things that you're going to be putting on, say, like, you know, you could use like IPFS for this or something like that, but you have to have a way to sort of fund it. Like we still have a problem with like how do we help the third world whenever there are basically any gas costs, because it eats up, you know, the vast majority of the transactions that they would want to do. So, you know, even if it is some of these things, like until just, I guess scaling will help, but we're always just going to be behind. It's always going to be way cheaper to store things on one computer than on many computers. So I don't think we're going to get there, but yeah, maybe, but. So.
Not so sure about the last thing you said, but current blockchains for sure are not optimized for storing lots of data and for executing arbitrary commands very quickly. Focus on different things. It's on value management, and this is where you generally don't need that. But I'm just waiting. Maybe it's 10 years, maybe it's 20 years ahead. I'm waiting for the first decentralized supercomputer, And I think there's great potential there. Those are very hierarchical systems at the moment, but in my opinion, it's just a matter of time with the vast compute network resources that are out there to connect all of those for different purposes, also very specialized purposes. And this is when you will see complex mathematical models being executed on decentralized machines, such as, I don't know, not the next Ethereum, but some of the next Ethereums. I think it's going to happen, but it's probably still quite a bit of time until that's actually feasible.
Other question? Okay.
Hi, thank you. I'd like to, first and foremost, thanks the organizer and thanks the panel today, because it was a very interesting discussion. I'd like just to make one statement and add to what you said, if I may, and ask you a question as well. Just so that you know, one of the questions earlier was being asked as to know what kind of sector could actually benefit from it. And I can say, because we developed a solution for the European Union a couple of years ago, and it was actually highly well welcomed by 10 member states within 6 months. So it was a huge success, and I think at the time it might have been the first truly decentralized application in Europe to actually share true real financial documents between member states. And the purpose was to address a regulation. Usually that's a big driver shift, right? But at the same time, there's been so much money being invested in the past to address that, and it was always a failure because politically there was always a data ownership issue, right? And so I'd like just to bring to this discussion, and maybe to later discussion today and the next days, what is sometimes the big driver, for example, for public sector or for private sector alike. I think data ownership, interoperability were really like the 2 keywords that we needed to address. We saw earlier as well that there was sometimes a cost. So if it's obviously costly to actually make transaction, then that's obviously an issue. But at the same time, I think I'm a true believer that the European Union and states in general, and also private sector, can truly benefit from this. And coming from Luxembourg, it's a tiny country, but I think there's a great advances because the actors there know very well each other. And I know there's been a huge amount of work so that people know in terms of regulation at national level done. So we saw that sometimes it's a little bit of a downside and drawback to develop and for the adoption of blockchain. So maybe Luxembourg, amongst other states, can actually show where we should actually head to. And at the same time, so that people know as well, there's a huge amount of work, but it's painfully slow because it's international standard organization, the ISO. They're working on Technical Committee 307, and they are dedicated to blockchain as well. So they are doing all they can as well to promote regulation and to promote new standards as well to help everyone. But at the end of the day, the idea is, in terms of the application, I think public sector, to me, to my humble point of view, I think it is a really, really big candidate that would really benefit. So citizens, all of us alike, and at the same time, private sector, like financial sector, I think they have much to do and they recognize it. But obviously, it won't change in a minute because it would take obviously a long time. It took almost 60 years to actually get into shape. They're already working extremely well to analyze their entire setup process, and all the actors, European central banks, national, and the big actors that I won't name them, but we all know them. They're all working on it, so they want to move to the blockchain. So I think it's highly positive, and I think for all of us in the room, this is really great stuff. So that we get reassured that it's not something that we think it may happen in 20 years, like we've been hearing this for the last 10, but I think it's actually happening now. So I think this is great. So that was my statement I wanted to add to what you said, because I think it's really, really valuable to know that, so that we know we feel we are part of something as of today. And my question to you was actually, according to the program, I wanted to ask the panel, if that's all right with you, what is your definition of what we call the Oracle problem? So it's not an easy one, I suppose. Thank you.
Okay.
It goes back to, introducing an external source which a blockchain has no knowledge about. So a blockchain has knowledge about the entire history of transactions from day one, like Bitcoin, right? But once you start adding that external data on chain, it cannot verify no matter how much you try, because it doesn't have that barrier. You can't cross that barrier. We can advocate different ways. I advocate for trustless, distributed trust where multiple parties, multiple independent parties put that data on chain. Other people might have a different view on it, but ultimately that's the Oracle problem, is how do you get data on chain and then either trust it or have it in a trustless, distributed manner, if that makes sense.
It's a tough question, by the way, but maybe summing it up, the Oracle problem is the trust in the availability and integrity of data that has an external source to the system that we're using it in.
Yeah, I mean, they did a good job on the Oracle problem. I think, back to your point on the governments, coming on chain, it actually scares me a lot, having the governments come on our chain. I hope I think they'll probably want to stick to their own chain. But if they do eventually come onto Bitcoin and Ethereum, I think you're starting to see a lot of these really, really big problems with like USDC, for instance, and actually these dollar coins on. Basically, if there ever is a contentious hard fork, they kind of get to choose which chain wins, because, you only have one chain that gets to withdraw the USDC. And you can imagine, like, let's say all of the financial records or all of the housing documents are on Ethereum. If there's ever a hard fork, the US government could say, well, actually, we're only going to recognize housing ones on this fork. So it leads to a whole bunch of problems if you actually have, governments putting it on the chains that you're trying to have censorship resistant from governments. So yeah, you want to make sure that you almost don't invite them onto our chains.
I would define the Oracle problem as getting off-chain data onto the blockchain and making sure it's correct. But there's like a lot of nuance with what it means to have the data be correct. But for the sake of conciseness, I won't get into that.
Okay.
How are we with time, by the way? Because we started early,
well,
and
it depends.
I think I'd like to add to the comment that you made about the public sector and using decentralized technologies. And we have pretty good examples, actually. I was working at Deutsche Telekom before, and there were two very good use cases that absolutely made sense for the public sector to be on chain. One was, and that's also where you see that also the public sector can be innovative if you let them actually try themselves out. One is asylum management. When does it make sense? If you don't have a top-down hierarchy, then decentralized technologies make a lot of sense. Or if you don't want to have it. Now in Germany, we have a federal system. In the EU, we have a federal system. By definition, by law, there cannot be a single party that rules over the others. So if you have asylum seekers come into Germany, they're being captured at some border of some member state, for example, Bavaria. Now, they might live completely somewhere else, and they might work someplace else, awaiting the final decision whether they're allowed to stay or not. This was actually implemented and has begun productive on chain. Why? Because you have all those federal agencies, you have member state agencies that need to collaborate, that by definition and law need to remain the masters of their data, but they need to collaborate. So the blockchain in this case was the process engine that made sure that the asylum management process went from A to B, so to the end, and had a decision, of course, but that decision was transparent and could be backtracked if there was any mistake in it. Every single decision, remember, is about an individual, whether you're allowed to stay in that country or not after having been a refugee for I don't know how many thousand kilometers. So it's very important to make the right decision, and it's very important to correct that decision if it's wrong. right? So that made a ton of sense, and in my opinion, left after the pilot, so I don't know, but I think it was successful, and as I said, it's gone productive. Same is true, by the way, for self-sovereign identities. Decentralized identity systems, I mean, they have centralized parts in it, by the way, especially on part of the issuer, and also me as a holder of my identity, I'm a central entity by definition, yeah? But the management of those identities makes a ton of sense to do this in a decentralized manner, and that's what we call self-sovereign identities, and also there are quite a few interesting initiatives in the EU. I'm not sure about the United States, by the way, but that's definitely where governments and the public sector can benefit from decentralized technologies.
Okay. Is it finished? Because I was waiting for some sign from Farmina, but I forgot that I'm blind, so I don't see anything. Actually, nothing. So
we have 10 more minutes?
Last question. So are there any other questions for our panelists? Okay. So. Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
So I can thank our panelists. Thank you for this constructive environment that you created, and for all the questions also from the audience. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone, for attending day one. I laughed a lot, I learned a lot, and I hope you as well.